Well, hi everyone. So my name is Nat, and for those of you who have not been before, I'm the head of community at an organization called Exceptional Individuals. In short, we help people who are neurodivergent, for those who think differently to the majority of the population. This can include all sorts of things from dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and a whole heap of others. Now, today, we're going to be focusing on autism. Now, just to make sure that we are not just academic experts, but also experts by experience, myself, I have autism, also dyslexia and dyspraxia, and my colleague April, which is one way or the other, is autism and female. So we've ticked there. Now, though today we are going to be looking at the differences between male and female, there will be more of an emphasis on females simply because that is the area where there's the most kind of gray area and less kind of knowledge, and there's a lot of myths. So it is going to be on both sides, but there's going to be more of a focus. Okay, cool. We've got most Fs. I'm a maths teacher and I'd also like to learn more about autism. Great stuff. Essentially, the A to Z of neurodiversity. Get in contact. We're based in London. We support all of the UK. And if any of you do tend to be further afield, there's no harm in getting in contact. If there's enough demand, you never know. World domination is always on the tables. So our last webinar that we did last week was dyslexia across cross-culture. And it was really fascinating. We dove in deep to how different countries, different cultures, different kind of subcultures kind of experience, observe, talk about dyslexia. So that has now been edited and uploaded to YouTube. So do check out our YouTube channel. Just type in Exceptional Individuals. And don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that little bell. Always wanted to say that. So do that if you do get involved if you're able to. So autism and sex. Now, obviously, sex. I'm not talking about intercourse. I'm talking about the gender that we were born with. Now, for all of you who I appreciate there's lots of different terminologies between sex and gender assignments. And I'll be honest with you, I am not a specialist in that area. So if I'm a bit clunky with my language and sometimes use the wrong phrase, like interchangeably, please forgive me. It's definitely not intentional, but I'll try my best to get that language right. Always, I'm a neurodiversity expert, but I always try to get other areas as right as one can do. So with that kind of understood, let's talk about autism and sex. And as I said, today is going to be predominantly focused on males and females. But as most of us will know, depending on how you consider yourself, that is also going to have a big impact. But let's be real, there's probably not that many studies on it, or at least I wasn't able to find a lot of studies on non-binaries. So a quick definition, just to make sure we're all on the same page. What is autism? So the official title is Autism Spectrum Disorder, ASD. However, you will notice in some of the reports and studies that we're looking at today, people change the words as much as they like. I'll call it autism. I'll call it ASD. I'll call it ASC. ASD is your go-to. However, some people like ASC, autism spectrum condition. It's seen as a little bit more friendlier, more approachable, more positively orientated. So for me, honestly, I don't really have, I'm easy on both of them. I mean, in an ideal world, ASC is the go-to, but if we're talking from a clinical perspective, which a lot of the things we're looking at today are, that's why I go with ASD. So autism, in a nutshell, is characterized by deficits in impulse control, sensory regulation, and the ability to initiate and sustain reciprocal social interactions and communications. If that didn't make any sense to some of you, do not worry. This is like the real clinical definition, and we are going to be breaking things down in a lot more manageable, easier to understand terms. But in a nutshell, autism is a different way of communicating and processing information. I particularly like this little GIF, which says, it looks like Earth, but there are a lot of differences. And that's kind of autism, you know. If you were to ask someone with autism, what does it look like to be autistic? They wouldn't really know because all they've ever known is how they see their own world. But you know there are differences to how other people see it. So first question to all of you, are there differences in the brain between autistic men and women? Yes or no? So do you think there are differences? Okay, interesting. We got 80% on yes, 20% on no. And honestly, guys, this is anonymous. And the answers, you can find contradictory evidence depending where you look. Now, interestingly, most of the evidence leans towards no. Obviously, there are differences in male and female brains. But when it comes down to looking at autism, it's not so straightforward because we know there isn't any magic but like silver bullet in order to diagnose autism. You can't just run one of us through a machine and say, yeah, ding, 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 autism. You have to do tests. You have to do like more of a holistic approach, talk to people, understand them. And that's how we diagnose it. Now, obviously, the chemicals which affect male and females are always going to be there, but there's not particularly a clear link. So today I was expecting it to go more down a scientific route, but actually we decided the conversation is going to be steering in different directions. We're following the breadcrumbs, we're following the data. So let's see where we end up. So Priscilla, sorry, I'm so bad at pronunciation, thinks is influenced by social performance. And yeah, it is more related to social factors. So yeah, I'm not saying yes or no either way, but I'm saying currently the evidence is predominantly based on social factors. So if there are differences in the brain, it's not substantial or not enough that has been researched. Now, again, a bit of terminology because I want to make sure we are all on the same page. You're going to be hearing this phrase chucked around a lot lately, DSM-5. It's a beast of a book. I wouldn't recommend reading it. It's boring, but it's more meant to be used as like a flick through. So like that bit, that section, think of it like the Bible of diagnosing individuals. Now, interestingly, though this is what people talk about all the time, this is predominantly based in America. I mean, let me know if any of you know other countries that use the DSM-5. In the UK, we genuinely go toward the ICD, which is the International Clarification of Disease, version 11. They're not too different, to be fair. They overlap considerably. There's a few kind of little bits here and there that differ. So most of the research is going by the DSM-5 definition. I wouldn't get too hung up about it. But for an example, when we did use the term Asperger's, the DSM-5 was, they got rid of the term first, and the ICD was later in adopting that change. So depending on what versions you get, there are going to be some differences. It's just not going to be like differ dramatically. So our first study of the day about autism and sex, and we're starting off with an article from 2014 from Hillier. And it's titled Sex Differences in Autism Spectrum Disorder based on the DSM-5 criteria. So it is important to know the criteria of what we're looking at. So this report, and this was a big report, by the way, so I simplified it as much as I possibly could do while keeping it accurate. But bear in mind, you will want to see the original study if you want to quote any of this, just to make sure that you kind of got the right angle. So it explored the presentation of autism in girls and boys. So there were 69 on one side, 69 on the other side. And it was like an okay study, not the biggest amount, but a good starting off point. And they found that girls were often able to have a two-way communication. So back and forth, back and forth. However, though they could initiate a conversation, which males tended not to be that good at, they weren't really great at retaining friendship. So their kind of interactions were very kind of, they're just like skin deep. They didn't go down that far. So like, oh, hi, how are you? Good. They picked up characteristics like, being able to mimic or echo, but it wasn't much deeper than that. Where males, on the other hand, they would struggle with even basic eye contact, putting their heads down. And this is really interesting because when we think of autism, we normally think of someone who can't look, can't make communications, particularly at a young age. But this just isn't what the research showed when they were looking at girls. So obviously there's a mismatch here between what the criteria is saying autism is and what like research and studies is also showing that autism is, particularly in girls. So girls had less and different restricted interests. And what do we mean by restricted interests? Well, when we there's like the autistic superpower, people who can remember every single train from 1900, or the person who can do the Pokemon rap backwards. A lot of time with people with autism, they have really distinct interest, things that they get completely obsessed over. And this found that though that is true, it doesn't tend to be as strong in girls as it does in boys, which again, I found kind of really interesting. And as a result of like not having the same kind of characteristics or like easily observable observations, teachers typically had fewer concerns for girls and boys. So in a class, the teachers, they've got a fairly big size class. Let's face it, they normally got about 30 students and they don't have the world's best understanding of autism. They have a basic understanding. And if they do have an understanding, it's going to be from the DSM-5 or the one that we use in the UK, even if they're not aware that it is from that. And the criteria they're looking for are going to be the ones that apply most to males. So we're seeing a big thing here. And as a result, if you are female, if you have autism, if you're in the education system, you are less likely to get pulled out and say, hey, I think we might want to get you an assessment. I think maybe some extra support would be beneficial. So you can see why any stats on how many people have autism when we're splitting it by gender isn't going to be fair. This is why I'm not really going to go into details on the numbers because they're not accurate. And the last point is girls with autism present different from the classic look of autism. You might have heard of the classic autism. These are, eye contact, kind of fidgety, one interest, not being able to process information as fast, like all the kind of standard stereotypical look doesn't really apply to females. Obviously it can, but not how we would imagine. Now, in the comments, feel free to share your experiences. Like, do you agree with these studies? Do you disagree? Is there like other observations that you found? As I mentioned at the very start of today, nothing is set in stone. So it's okay to say, I don't agree with that. And we can kind of look at where there might be a fault in the studies, where there's still research is needed. Correlation doesn't equal causation, which means just because something looks like it is, doesn't mean it necessarily is. Coincidences are a thing. But again, these people are proper professionals. But I always like to really like examine it. So nice one to all of you. Are you autistic? Yes or no? Now, I purposefully did not include a maybe. For this, I need it to be either yes or no. And this is because I'm going to be comparing it with other qualities later on. Even if you aren't diagnosed, but you highly suspect, you could still say yes. Like for us exceptional individuals, we don't get that hung up on official diagnosis. Self-reporting is more than enough. Okay, nice. No. And honestly, it's fine. But even if you do not, understanding these differences can definitely help you. Because let's be real, we all know people who have autism in our life. Even if we're not sure who they are, we definitely do. Nice. Now I want to know your sex. So what was the sex you were born as? Were you born as a male or born as a female? Whoa, where are the men today? The male. I know there's some in the audience. Okay, so this is quite interesting. most of the people who are here today, according to this not particularly scientific poll, are female and autistic. Erman says, if someone is assigned female at birth or AFAB, I'm aware autism and gender identities are hot topic issues, but it is important that it is highlighted. As I joined late, unsure if this was mentioned. I did mention at the start that I am not an expert on terminology on gender by any means. So please do not take anything I say as disregarding other genders. I'm absolutely not. I've still got a lot to learn about that area, but I really appreciate you mentioning it and pointing in the right direction. So I'm trying to get better at remembering, assigned female at birth. Okay, brilliant. So we've got some nice here, and we've only got one male today. We really need to, I definitely have seen, in terms of people who are typically interested in the subject of neurodiversity, there has always been a disproportionate amount of those who resonate with being female than males. Why is that? I'd love to know your thoughts. So we mentioned about the book that kind of defines what autism is, but how do we go about and diagnose it? There's many ways to skin a cat, as they say, which is gruesome, but the way which is typically done is the ADOS-2. So this is the Autistic Diagnostic Observation Schedule, and these are the things that are typically done in order to diagnose autism. So you have a diagnostic. You kind of do activities, games, like questions to find out whether or not you overlap with a lot of qualities that other people with autism typically have. A lot of the time you do observations, particularly with children. You'll just watch the kid and make notes and just see them in their natural habitat and seeing what kind of resonates. Durations, the tests are normally very much regimented. They all look very similar. Skills assessments, age range, all these different factors can change whether or not someone is or isn't autistic. We all know that autism isn't like an on-off switch, it is a spectrum, but typically you'll only get a diagnosis if your characteristics inhibit or interfere with your day-to-day life. That just means you've got to have to, we know autism is highs and lows and strengths and things that we need to work on or not that bothered about. But when we diagnose people, unfortunately, we are predominantly looking at the deficits. Here's another terminology. So you're going to be hearing, when we talk about like diagnostic and assessments and understanding what is autism, what is not, you're going to hear the word behavior quite a lot. And maybe this is just me, but I thought it was really important to mention what we mean by behavior. Because when I think of behavior, I think, does it mean I'm naughty? Does it mean I'm misbehaving or I'm as good as gold? No, when we're talking about behavior, particularly in like a medical sense, we're on about like characteristics. So this is, again, a bit official terminology, but important to get the foundations right. The measure of the observable responses made by a person, often in a reactionary way. These responses can be measured as traits that are witnessed and form the basis for which diagnosis for neurodevelopmental conditions are given. Oh, you can see I'm very dyslexic. I really struggle with reading some of these big words. But from what I understand about this, it is just viewing behavior. And this goes back to how we diagnose autism. It isn't through some magic like fMRI machine or CAT scan that like autism. It is due to witnessing behaviors. And as such, there is a lot of room for bias, misdiagnosis, overdiagnosis, underdiagnosis. These things are a human problem. And at the moment, this is the only way that we can diagnose autism. Are there differences in the brain? Yes, there are. But are they strong enough to kind of replace one-to-one chats and assessments? No. So now on to the next study, sex differences in ASD. So this other study, which is, again, really interesting, and all these are really, this was only 2015, is that they found no sex differences in ASD symptoms. So this is just one person's report, by the way, well, a group of people. So do not go and use any of these as absolute facts, but you can say studies have found that there are no differences in ASD symptoms. So what it's like in males is the same in females. Now, you might say, no, that's not true. But ask yourself, why isn't it true? Is it because there aren't any differences, or is it because how we observe the differences? That's kind of the key thing here. It's our unconscious bias. It's how we view the world, what our previous understanding, the historical context. This still might be proven to be not true, but a lot of reports back this up as well. They do, however, say that males are often diagnosed with ASD earlier. So males were, I would love to know when you were all diagnosed, for those of you that have been. As males were typically, maybe 3 or 4 is about the average time to be diagnosed. But yet for females, it could be in like late teens or even adult life. Because remember, teachers are typically who are the ones who initially kind of spot the red flags. They will typically look for the classic autism. And females, girls, those assigned at birth will only seek a diagnosis or support when they have been struggling for many, many years. So yeah, it sucks, but it's very interesting to know. And it's going to hopefully help you for supporting other people, knowing that this internal bias is a thing. Mr. TL said, assessment. I have known cases where A, male was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, and this was amended to ASD as an adult. B, females are initially diagnosed with borderline personality disorder as adults and have been amended to ASD. That's really interesting, Kim, and you are right. Misdiagnosis is a really big thing. We're always changing our definitions and our understanding on what these conditions are and what they look like. And they typically don't counter different factors like social economic background, kind of your culture, your gender. These things aren't taken into consideration. It is important to know, though, that those books I told you about, like the DCSM-5, these aren't like, when I said the Bible, maybe that's not accurate, because these change. These are living documents. We're on version 5 now, and we're on version 11 for the other book. They are always being updated and changed. Females show better functioning. So what do we mean by that? Well, earlier how I spoke about males will show more of the classic symptoms or characteristics. Females will be able to communicate, will be able to make the eye contact, all the things that we normally attribute to autism. Females typically will not have as much of an issue with it. So they get missed. Different behaviors in male and female. So we're not saying that when we say there's no sex differences in ASD, we're talking from like a biological angle. But when we're talking about an observable point of perspective, that's when the differences are really kicking in. Females tend to be more functional and diagnosed less. So let's see some of the comments we got. Danielle says, I was diagnosed age 27. I am female. 27, again, that's quite late. That's a lot of years where you could have been getting support at the very beginning. Emerald says, my brother was diagnosed at 4. I was diagnosed at 27 last year with ADHD. Pushed for this myself for about 5 years. Wow. I mean, that is a perfect example. 2 people related, 1 male, 1 female, 1 diagnosed at 4, 1 diagnosed at 27. I mean, that's proof right there. Mr. TL was diagnosed at 27. See, that's quite late, particularly for a male as well, which is interesting. We've got ADHD and autism. Tracy says, yep, female diagnosed at 42, ADHD. Wow. So even though we have a small group here, we're still seeing something pretty shocking. Nicole says, my brother was also diagnosed at 5. I'm still waiting a diagnosis. I'm 25 this month. Well, happy birthday. But geez, it is tough out there. If we understand why, we might be able to better support and at least make doctors more aware. Remember, doctors aren't gods, they're real people, so they can only learn so much. If we can point them in the right direction, or at least give them, hey, have you thought about this? It might help. Anya says, I am 46 and in the middle of an ASD assessment, and it's awful because I also have ADHD and complex PTSD. Oh, so sorry to hear. Like, there's nothing wrong with being autistic, but if you don't understand your autism, it can be very challenging. Emma says, I was diagnosed with ADHD at 4 months old. I'm 24. It's interesting. So you see, it's a mixed, but if we would take the average out of the group, it's not looking so promising. Oh, Emma, 4 months ago. That honestly, that's my dyslexia. Again, apologies. So yeah, actually, Emma backs up with what we are already saying. So a quick thing, AFAB, people might just be seen as quirky for similar behaviors. Absolutely true. And April says, I was diagnosed when I was 4. So April, see that again, you're an exception to the rule, which probably meant you were able to get support earlier on, which obviously is a good thing. So now, I know I've just said it, well, hey, I'm ahead of the schedule. Just let me know, when were you diagnosed? Now, if you weren't diagnosed, you could put, when did you, actually, no, let's just stick with diagnosis. Okay, and you see the colors here. Green is female, yellow is male. We've got an unknown. Most people were over 30. Isn't that interesting? And I say interesting because obviously it's actually appalling and shocking. Mr. TL says, for the above example of crossover, ADHD and ASD have similarities for those who possess them both. There can be contradictory, competing characteristics, but it is probably better to know when you have both. Yeah, no, it's very, very common to have co-occurring comorbidity, coexisting conditions. Again, everyone, look at this, genuinely, the smallest percentage from today was diagnosed before 16. And these are the formative years. These are the years where it has the biggest impact, whether or not you have support. This isn't good, but maybe we can make change. But I think it's a slow, slow progress. So one more study, because who doesn't love facts and science? This was done in 2016. So late diagnosed women with ADHD. There were 14 women that were interviewed with autism, and they spoke about autism being missed due to pretending normal. And I want to highlight this because this is another real big one. Typically, always, you are born with autism, you die with autism. It is a part of you. It is how your brain is kind of connected. But as adults, people often see less of the characteristics. Now, is this because you've outgrown autism? No, you never grow out of autism, but you do learn to adapt to the neurotypical world, a thing called masking. Now, women or females tend to learn to mask much, much earlier on. And they are, though, remember we said they are better at general communication from a younger age. They will typically pretend to be normal. And I'd love to know your own views. Have any of you feel that you're always pretending to be normal and can't be your true, authentic self? They also found that there's a big conflict between autism and feminine identity. And again, I would love to know your thoughts on this. Nicole says, yeah. So what do we mean by feminine identity? So your identity as a female, do you think there's some conflict between can you have a feminine identity and be autism? Or does saying you're autistic kind of masculate you more? Or maybe you disagree with that completely. I would really love to know. But I do know if people were to close their eyes and the average person and think of what autism looks like, they probably would imagine a male. But then again, they'd probably imagine a male for most things. So maybe this is a wider systemic issue rather than just autism. Danielle says, yep, I feel the same way as Tracy. Masking to perform normal, to be accepted in. Yes, I'm still struggling to know my authentic self. All points apply to me, including the abuse, sadly. Yeah, and now we are going to get on. We're going to take a dark turn. And I am sorry. I hope this isn't triggering for some of you, but it's very important to speak about. Sexual abuse from these studies were sadly very, very widespread. And this was due to vulnerabilities from undiagnosed ASD. Those with autism can be some of the nicest, friendliest, open, don't give a F in the world, but it does mean that they're at more risk for manipulation, for being coerced into activities. It's why you do have to be a lot more careful with autistic girls. And this is because the world isn't a great place. So this kind of like, the like in your head when you have those warning bells, like this isn't safe, this is a bit dodgy, that bell isn't really ringing for those who have ASD or ASC as those who were born female. It's really sad, to be honest, that this has to be seen as a negative rather than a positive, but that's kind of where we are. I have almost no current self-identity due to mirroring and changing myself to suit others. Honestly, I'm really sorry to hear that. And the last thing which they found, okay, we've done all this. What is going to make the difference? What is going to change society? Timely identification. If we know someone has autism early on, then we can teach them to be themselves, to be their authentic self, to feel that they don't need to mask. If we can identify autism at a young age, we can help people form their own identity. If we know people are autism at a young age, we can teach them about not being taken advantage of and essentially learning a bit of street smarts. These are all things which can be improved on a fairly easy level, but you need to understand, I don't want to say the problem, but you need to understand the circumstances before you can start putting in measurable actions. What is imposter syndrome? Great question. So imposter syndrome is when you don't really believe yourself. So it could be like, I don't deserve to be an artist because I work on a computer and I don't really use paints. You are an artist, you don't have that faith. Or in a context of autism, maybe you don't really feel autistic. You're being diagnosed with autism, but because you don't match the criteria what other people look for in autism, you kind of feel like a bit of a fraud. I'll tell you what, though I'm male, obviously, no, not obviously, but I'm male, I do also get imposter syndrome because I work with such a wide variety of those with autism and I don't see myself in them. Autism is a very individual condition. It doesn't have the same community as other kind of disabilities. And that's because of how unique it really is. So we know autism is diagnosed more in male, and we have spoke about a lot of the reasons why, but I'd love to know in your own words, are there other reasons that we haven't spoken about, even if it's just a hypothesis, like a guess or a hunch or a feeling? I would love to know, are there other things going on under the hood that might be contributing to more females being diagnosed? Mr. TL said, on imposter syndrome, does anyone attending today struggle with saying no? Yeah, I'm there. I'm always like up for anything. And that can also contribute to the vulnerabilities of having autism. Yeah, Tracy agrees, absolutely. So anyone who know any other reasons why males are diagnosed more frequently? If you think we've covered them all, that's fair enough. But it's always good to know that studies and research is still going on. All right, so we've got one here. We've got women are often seen as too emotional, overly sensitive. And that's interesting because there is this not accurate and not very nice view of autism as being unempathetic and sometimes emotionless. And because women show the opposite of that, they can't be autistic. Not true. We've got structural patriarchy, I'm going to say. Yep, absolutely. Sorry, I do always try my best with reading. I feel pressure to fit into society and therefore mask a lot. Yeah, if you've been masking your entire life, it's very, very, very difficult to stop that. I know I mask a lot to try to sometimes like sound more intelligent than my vocabulary allows, and often trip up on my own words, just because there is this kind of perception that those who have a neurodiversity have an intelligent deficit. Hopefully we all know that's not true. Oh, nice, they're all coming in now. Women appear to be more aware of expectations of societal norms and have more pressure to fit in. Yes, that is definitely one that I've observed. Women are always, they have so much expectations to look this way, to sound this way, to have those type of jobs, to be like the model idea of a woman. Does autism fit into those norms? Not really, not at the moment. So they are more likely to cover it up, where men, let's be honest, can get away with a lot more. But as always, do feel free to hold me to account if I've said anything which you don't necessarily agree with. A silly one, but stimming being seen as being a woo girl. I never thought about that. Woo! But yeah, for male stims, no biggie. Sunjan says, also have imposter syndrome. I have always masked a lot. Agree with female conditioning from an early age. I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, and maybe ADHD and autism. General societal sexism, women being too sensitive / too cold as seen as deliberate. Wow, seeing so many of you resonate with this. One more quick study, because it's always nice to back things up with research being done. Autism, females, and the DSM-5, gender bias in autism diagnosis. So when we talk about bias, all we're talking about is preconceived ideas that people act on without actually knowing the facts. When we talk about bias, we normally think about race, like, oh, that person's Black, they must be dangerous. That's a bias because it's not true and it's founded upon our preconceived ideas. But bias can exist in everything. Oh, she's a female, she must be a nurse and not a doctor. Or, oh, they're acting a bit emotional, it must be another reason. And people don't kind of connect it with autism. So bias is a really, really big one. It's difficult to overcome, but it can be overcome the more we educate and learn. Today, it's predominantly females who have joined today's group. Personally, I think that's a real shame. I think we want to have people from all backgrounds, genders, representations to attend these sessions to learn at the same time. So there's a report from Hanley from 2015 found that autism is thought to occur mainly in males. Again, might not sound rocket science to a lot of you, but this is what is for. So the key word here is for. It's not saying autism does mainly occur in males, but if you were to ask people, this is the prevailing thought. The ASD criteria may be biased. Again, we would probably say is biased, but they have to be very careful with language. And diagnostic screening plays a role in this bias. So diagnostic screening we talked about earlier, this is when you assess someone for autism. But when they create the criteria, it was still very much from a male perspective. The original founding of the first ever autistic diagnosis were done from, I think, a group of 14 people. All people were male and were all children of medical professionals. It wasn't a very good representation at all. Obviously, we have updated it since then, but things take a long time to change. And once some sort of view of something is created, very, very difficult to change. What we got here? We've got, Inya says, I have similar experience with long COVID, ignored for over a year and pushed to make take antidepressants. Physical symptoms are ignored and most is explained as depression and anxiety. I'm sorry you went through that. Tracy says, when I went to the GP for an ASD referral, I found it more difficult than when I went for an ADHD. Felt like I was fake due to the questions asked based from the stereotypical male-centric questions. Yeah, you honestly said it way better than I could have. We've got one question on here which says, I think this could contribute to the latter diagnosis / misdiagnosis of females as the criteria is directed more towards characteristics and behavior in males. Absolutely, I completely agree with you on that. I appreciate this is a tough subject. It's a heavy subject, but I'm sure you'll all agree a really, really important one. Let's move on a little bit to biological / developmental, the processes by which humans grow and develop. So we're moving a bit further away from societal expectations and more from the early years of birth. So here's a quick one. I learned to talk at what age did you learn to talk? Now, you might not know this, but maybe your parents told you you learned at a young age or a much older age. Now, most of us would have learned at 4 to 5, and 6 or 7, those with autism, some people with other things do learn at that age. It takes a bit longer. I learned to speak at about 5, which is quite late. But because those are like the typical ages, this is when you'll mostly kind of get picked up. As females tend to be normally more advanced, they learn to speak and read, they typically learn to do everything faster, they will get missed out from the diagnosis. Because when we're comparing individuals to see what the norm is, we're normally judging people as a collective, like males and females together. But because they develop at different speeds, it does put the females at a disadvantage because they very well may have autism, but because they have developed faster than their male counterparts, the males get the priority for the support given. April says, I was 2 years old when I first learned to speak. Nice. Nicole says, loving the gifts, keeping my ADHD engaged. That's why I do it. I get bored so damn easy. So I try to make these as energetic and as fun as I possibly can. Woohoo! Now for school practices. Do teachers know what they're doing? Now, I know we've got a teacher in the audience, so you're the expert, you tell me. From my understanding, most teachers do not get sufficient amount of training in special needs, let alone autism or any of the others. This does not mean they do not care. All the teachers I've ever met have been amazing individuals, but that bias, that preconceived embedded bias is always there. So quick question to all of you. What sets were you in? Were you in the bottom set, which is like the lowest one? Were you in like around the middle set? Or were you top of your class, smashing the subjects? Interesting, nice. So why this is important is typically males will be in the bottom set and females will be in a higher set. You might remember this from school. More males are in the bottom sets than the females. And if you're in a higher set, you're considered not to need any support. But as we know, autism isn't about, isn't inherently about intelligence. You can also have intelligent developmental challenges, but it's not inherently part of it. And if you're in the middle set or top set, no one would give you that support. It's only if you're in the bottom set where you get the support. And that is, critically not right. Because you could still very much have autism and be in the top set. If anything, probably a higher likelihood. A lot of people with autism, are really intelligent, some of the smartest people I've ever met. So it seems weird that we put all our eggs in one basket in the bottom sets, and we forget the people who are already succeeding in certain areas, even though socializing, communication-wise, they might find more challenging. Trace says, similar to April. April was on about at secondary school. I was on the highest sets for English and Welsh, but the lowest sets for maths and technology. That's interesting. Like, for instance, April, you are fantastic at English. So maybe you didn't get the support you needed. But I know with communication that, if you don't mind me saying, is an area that you still work on. So one thing doesn't cancel out the other, but the way we distribute support does. We got middle, Tim bounced up and down and back up and down again. Tracy depends on the subject. Interesting. Unfortunately, I was in the bottom set for everything. Despite me being pretty good at science, I wasn't allowed to be in a higher set because my other subject, kind of like the way the timetable worked. Next, cultural influences. We're almost at the end, so hold on. Historical, geographical, and familiar factors that affect assessments and intervention processes. So what are activities you liked as a child? Sports, music, reading, art? You think this couldn't possibly impact whether or not I get an autistic diagnosis, could it? Yeah, it could. For instance, art is very expressive. Reading shows a level of intelligence. Sports shows that you are a team player. All of these characteristics, they don't go hand in hand with most people's idea of autism. Males will typically, sit in a dark room and play video games all day. Nothing wrong with that. I do a lot of that. But those are the kind of isolating individual characteristics that are typically looked for in autism. But yet someone who is female might be more inclined to go off and talk with people, play games, do these things. And that's where the difference is. Nicole says, anyone else has clicked them all? You know what? If you like them all, you like them all. I would have picked music. Loved it. I was on top set until A level, reflecting on early years in school. I now realized I was having many meltdowns. I just got put into the quiet corner in the library to read. Later in school, I was sent to run laps on the school because I was considered disruptive when I finished my work early. Damn. Yeah, I would say actually, I liked art and music. I was terrible at reading and sports. I now like reading, but it took me a long time to get there. Okay, last question. Do you agree or disagree? Autism have different neural origins in each sex. True or false? And females and males would benefit from differential diagnosis and treatment. So the first one, autism has different neural origins in each sex. As far as I can find for the evidence to back this up, it is not true. Now, again, prove me wrong, but there isn't substantial evidence to prove this, which means that it is society which is the big blocker here, nature v nurture. And the last one, females and males would benefit from different diagnosis and treatments. Yes, they would. Really, really interesting, isn't it? That though there is no genetic key differences that have been shown to have a significant effect, having a different way of treating and diagnosing people would matter. And this is because the way we treat females from at complete birth, from the day they are born, from the pink that we use to say, welcome to the world, has a massive impact to how we act and interact and see the world. So though these two could look contradictory, they're not. I read a lot. I get books taken from me because I wasn't being social enough. I did sports, but always played defense/goal, less communication needed. Nice. Reading bits, activities, most promoted at school. Nice. Cool, great. Now, thank you all. Quick question we got. This is why gifted children can get lost in the system. Yeah, the system isn't made for gifted children, particularly gifted females with autism. But knowing this means we might actually be able to change things. So all hope is not lost. The fact you're here today is a great thing. So a quick conclusion, and I think this study really sums it up nicely. a qualitative exploration of female experiences of ASD. So 18 females with autism and 4 mothers with autism got together and had a good discussion on what they could do to reduce bias. The 5 key themes were fitting in, obstacles for women and girls, predominantly in education and work, navigating different aspects of autism, and the perspective of others. The key takeaway is experiences of female autistics or autistic females can create better diagnostic assessments for everyone. I know it sucks that we have to push so hard, but we need to keep talking about it. Otherwise, the process isn't going to change. If it isn't broke, no one's going to fix it. But more importantly, if nobody knows it's broke, no one's going to fix it. And we know that the system is biased. To how much? Who knows? But just from this small group today, I think it's clear to know more work is needed. So please, if you feel comfortable, please keep the discussion going. I think it's an incredibly important one. And I think the world would be better off for having a better understanding of what autism looks from multiple perspectives rather than just from the standard white male one. Now, if any of you are autistic and female and in the UK and think, you know what, I wouldn't mind a bit of support. I've never had support in my life, but I wouldn't mind some. Get in contact with us because we can actually get you free support, equipment, training, like technology, whatever would support you in the workplace. It's called a workplace needs assessment. I mention it every time because it is free and it's like the golden goose for people like us, particularly those who can't afford a diagnosis. This kind of gives you that credibility that you do deserve to have reasonable adjustments. And if any of you think you've got that imposter syndrome, like I don't need the support, this isn't the fact that you need it. It's the fact that it can take some of the pressure off and it can help benefit you in one shape or form. Now we're at the end now, but any last questions before I let you go on your merry ways? Well, we've also got, I think that hormonal frequencies changes would affect the mood and concentration in women. I was just wondering about that. I think you're right, but I don't think that's inherently part of autism. So yes, different things in women can impact it, but is it core part of autism? I think that's where we're saying there isn't that much of a genetic link. We've got Danielle says, sounds great. I've always really struggled with work. I will get in touch. Yes, please do. And we can get that set up right away. Indigo says, thanks, really enjoyed it. Tracy says, I'm considering changing careers to suit my neurodiversity. So do you offer advice and service? Absolutely. Go on our website. We offer support, training, coaching for anyone who is neurodiversity. We're a social enterprise, so we work with organizations and it allows us to do things like this today. This is our next workshop. The one next week is dyslexia discrimination. We're going to be looking at real world examples where people have been discriminated against for having dyslexia in the workplace. And what have they done about it? Really interesting. So do check that out. And here are some of our past webinars. Do check out our YouTube channel if you enjoyed today. Like and subscribe as always. Join our autism group on Facebook, a really great place to get opportunities and to chat and to keep this discussion going. Just search on Facebook, click this link or go on our website. And now we're at the end. So here is the details. If you want to get in touch, if you want further support, just go to exceptionalindividuals.com or drop our admin team a quick message and say you're interested in support, coaching, mentoring, workplace needs assessments, and we'll take it from there and we'll see how we can get on. Well, that's been us for today. Thank you so much, April, for recording today and for editing. And thank you all for attending and for the really, really great conversation. I think it's been a fantastic group and hopefully I'll see you all next week. Bye, everyone. Really appreciate it.